All right, welcome back, everyone. This next session is going to be focused around card not present fraud and new types of fraud types. As I know, we probably haven't had too many conversations without this topic coming up, so I know that this will be a relevant session for everyone. As I would like to welcome in Alan Whittemore from American Express, who's going to be the moderator for this session. Alan, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. As Jason mentioned, my name is Alan Whittemore, and I am the co-chair of the USPF Fraud Working Committee, along with Leslie Pollard, who today is going to be taking the helm for our Q&A portion. We have an excellent panel planned for today, talking about fraud trends. And I know some of you in the audience are probably thinking ahead, thinking maybe something along the lines of, oh, great, like another pandemic-related panel. I am so tired of talking about the pandemic. Like, we all have that fatigue. And let me say, I feel you. I think if you're anything like me, like, I'm ready to move on, like many people. But at the same time, I know there is still so many things that we can learn. There's a lot of insights that can still be shared, especially in regards to the world of fraud and fraud trends. So I'm excited for the panelists. So I think it may be helpful as we work through some of these questions and topics to think about it like this. Due to COVID-19, a lot of technologies that existed before the pandemic, they were really propelled forward in terms of adoption and implementation by the pandemic. And in that same way, fraud has followed suit. There are certain tactics and things that have been propelled and were given rise to by the pandemic. So those boosts and disruptions and behavioral changes and things, those are all things that we want to talk about, things that have been observed and experienced. So I have full confidence this panel is going to really knock it out of the park, and we'll bring some fresh insights on what they've been seeing and working on. And so with that, let's start with some introductions. I'll hand it over to you, Jamie.
Sure. Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Howard. I represent Cardinal Commerce, and I head up product for the organization. We sit in the fraud space like most people on the call today, and our mission is to help our clients keep their fraud at bay, increase their approvals, and then ultimately making sure that the shoppers and cardholder can get through that checkout as fast as they can. So really excited to be here with the co-panelists, and hopefully we'll get into some healthy Q&A at the end.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. Jeff?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Wickstead. I lead up marketing, product, and client solutions at Certify. Like Jamie, I've been fortunate enough to be in the space here for a while, the card not present fraud space. I have to admit, I'm like super passionate and like super curious about this. It's like madly frustrating, this space, and it's also like delightfully a ton of change in this. And those two things, like, I guess I really enjoy in this. I also feel a lot of the fraud, maybe some of the things we'll talk about today, are sort of gateways into other fraud that gets committed. And I think collectively, like, solving these problems as a community generally has like great downstream benefits for everyone. So excited to be here.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to have you. And Brandon.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Brandon Crawford. I am head of fraud operations and strategy with Wood Forest National Bank. I've been here for quite a while. I'm not new to the forum. We've been a participant for a long time, but looking forward to sharing an issuer's point of view and perspective as it relates to fraud prevention, and customer behaviors, and all the changes that have been ushered forward with the pandemic, and some of the things that we put in place to help remove some of that friction, also protect the assets of the bank and so forth. So glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, welcome to all the panelists. And I just want to note one more time that we will be taking questions throughout. So you'll see there is a Q&A box. There's also a chat box. So go ahead, and as you think of things, as our panelists share, please ask those questions. Our very own Leslie Pollard, again, will be helping to field those at the end of today's session. So moving ahead, we kind of already mentioned it. Commerce has shifted significantly. It's been something that's been reiterated through a lot of the different sessions already at these meetings. Of course, fraudsters have naturally sought out new attack vectors. So I'm just curious, Jeff, what key changes in behavioral patterns and spend have you been observing, and how have fraudsters tried to piggyback some of that change?
Okay, I'll try to tackle this. it's a big question here. Maybe I'll start with what I perceive as like some macro trends, like why do these things happen, or what's leading to these things happen? And these are certainly pre-COVID, and maybe COVID has helped accelerate some of these things. Data breaches is like it's a common term. Something in the news about this. Ironically, data breaches by number were down last year, quite significantly actually, but the number of records actually breached were up about 50 to 60%. So it's clear this is sort of one of these means by which to, well, harvest information and get it. And another one that we've seen rise is social engineering. So things like phishing and smishing and vitching are all these ways that people bombard themselves in your lives. Maybe a lot of you have seen this, whether you get a text message that says something's coming your way, or hey, there's this package from Amazon, like click this link or something like this. We've seen a rise in these social engineering attacks, again, really to harvest data on each of us so that ultimately you can take over someone's account, as an example. I think both of these first two, so data breaches and social engineering, they get really exacerbated by password reuse. So I'm guilty of it. I don't want to say that I'm not, but a lot of us reuse our usernames and passwords. And then when these data breaches happen, or someone gets a hold of your credentials, like the problem becomes like multiplied, because they can get into many things that that you do. Technology is a big one in this. So as much as our respective corporations love like cloud computing services, so the fraudsters, they can stand up technology in a matter of hours and take it all down in a matter of hours and do some really automated, sophisticated attacks. They don't need a team of individuals anymore. You can rely on a lot of these providers to do things and do them at a really good scale. I think maybe the fifth macro trend that we've seen, particularly last year and probably still continues this year, is generally around like government stimulus. These programs, whether they're consumer related or even business related, as to how you want to sort of interpret the stimulus, they generally divert fraudsters' attention. There's nothing better than like stealing money. Personal example for me is I live here in Illinois. Someone got a hold of my identity and filed an unemployment claim last fall on my behalf. There's probably nothing like more daunting than your employer reaching out to you to say, like, did you file an unemployment claim? No. Like, do you know something I don't know, or what? But so these things are, they definitely are real. They're happening. I think the state of Illinois here is a couple billion short from unemployment fraud. So I think you look at these sort of macro factors, and I think they're what generally like leads to some of these trends. If I maybe break them down, and I certainly want to give my panelists sort of take here as they see it from a diverse side as well, but they'll look at things like travel, maybe hospitality, entertainment, yeah, hard hit industry overall. So volumes down. Well, what we see is the fraud attacks are consistent or even higher than they were pre-COVID. So people are still banging on the doors to try to get in. We see a lot of like sleeper activity in these, where people creating accounts and then building or creating up tenure, letting this thing sit. And so that sometimes you can bypass normal fraud controls that maybe look at seeing, did you create the account yesterday, as an example? No, it's been in existence for a year or something like that. We've seen contactless explode in the travel space, maybe particularly hospitality. Think of hotels today, like, I don't know, nobody wants to go to the front desk to check in. It's another sort of spot you got to interact with someone. And so today most hotels will let you provision like a digital key right on your mobile app. Well, that turns what was traditionally like a card present transaction into something that's card not present. I got to like trust who's on the other side of that to provision this key. They can go right up to their room and certainly check in and check out. So a lot of different things that I think in the travel space that we've seen accelerated by COVID. If I sort of maybe contrast that with retail's seen an explosion in volume. Seems like everybody's doing something that they probably weren't doing last year. They're having food delivered to your house, or groceries, or you're doing buy online, pick up in store, or buy online, pick up at curbside. A lot of fulfillment options that have arisen. And you think about it, if you're on the merchant side of this, someone pulls up in their car and they open their trunk and you load a good in the back of it and they're sitting in their car, they got a mask on and they might hold their ID up through the window. Or like if we ever sort of thought of this like a year ago, we would have probably thought we were all mad that we would allow someone to come into a parking lot and put something in the back of their car and sort of pull off. But so a lot of sort of change in trends that have come about here. We've seen a lot of bot activity too, especially things on like gaming consoles that were released last year. A lot of fraudsters sort of writing scripted attacks to get at this information, procure this inventory, and then resell it back through other channels. So we're seeing some tactics there. Maybe I'll conclude here and say we generally see in sort of, I'll call it economic downturns generally, as a lot of more first party fraud. Things maybe like promotional abuse. So I'm enticed to sign up for an account. I get a 50% discount on my first order. Maybe this is food delivered to my home. I'll love it. It's great. I'll just go create another account and get 50% off like every time I order. So we see promotional abuse tends to arise during this. Chargebacks tend to come into here. I never got it. It didn't arrive. Returns abuse. I think we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, but it's another trend that we've seen arise. So anyway, I'll stop talking, but these are sort of a few macro trends that we see and then maybe how they proliferate themselves throughout a couple of industries.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Jeff. And one quick kind of thing back to you. It sounds like, I know you mentioned there was all these different forms of phishing taking place. And it's interesting. I know sometimes, U.S. citizens kind of have this reputation of being very guarded about privacy and their data and giving out personal data. Yet I think when things change, like there's a stimulus check hanging out there somewhere for you and you're unsure how to get your hands on it, for example, suddenly the rules kind of change, the guard gets lowered, and it just sounds to me, and I don't know if you'd agree, that maybe some of the basic practices that, we want people to be aware of, like anti-phishing and things like that, it sounds like we need to kind of maybe make sure people are aware that those things are still important today and effective.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. There's a little bit of some information overload. It used to be that we just like texted with friends, right? Like, what are you doing tonight kind of thing. Now I find like my kids text me in the house, like, where are you? Or can you like bring this upstairs? Now I find working from home, like people at work text me and ask me like, where are you? Kind of thing, or can you get on this call? Or and then equally in sort of, maybe I'll say in the retail community, you order something and then I get like maybe a 2-factor text to verify who I am, or I get shipping information that says like, hey, your good's on its way. Sometimes it can be overload. And then when the fraudster comes in with a phishing or a smishing text, in this case, sometimes you can be distracted and you click on it and you fall for it. And, you feel terrible afterwards, but sometimes it's just a ton of information overload that can just lead to a distracted consumer and you fall prey to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would just
go right ahead, Amy.
I would just add to that, talking kind of on that theme of information overload. I think, Jeff did a good job of talking about like some of the fraud trends, but if we talk specifically about even some of the CNP trends that we've seen, and I'll take a little bit of a different perspective on that, because of the increase in digital spend that's happening, what we're seeing from, some of the merchants and retailers, and I'd be interested in Brandon's perspective from the issuing side as well, is a super focus on optimization and making sure that as all of these consumers are going to digital channels, whether it's, traditional e-commerce or IoT commerce, smartwatches, Alexa, native applications, we want to make sure that those channels are not only optimized to get in and get what you want and streamline the flow, but also make sure they're secured. And we're talking about information overload. I think that there's a valid talk point there around like, what are we doing with all this data that's being shared too? And how are we using that data to, in fact, optimize the consumer's experience, but then also make sure that we're making the right risk decisions to ensure that we're keeping fraud at bay, but increasing the approvals. And I think that's something that we're seeing has been really accelerated because of this digital increase that was brought forth by COVID. And at some point it was going to happen. But unfortunately, the pandemic happened and it kind of pulled forward some of these other things. So we're really seeing our community and our partners lean into that and figure out, all right, there's a lot of information out there. What can and should we be doing together to make use of that information and exchanging that information to benefit the shopper at the end of the day? So I think that's a really strong trend that we've seen. And like I mentioned, we're starting to really lean into, but I'm curious from Brandon's perspective if they've have any observations from the issuing bank, because I mean, there's obviously a huge impact that we're seeing from that side. So I'll kind of throw that out there for Brandon.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. A couple of things from an issuing standpoint. Issuing banks historically are slow to adapt to customer needs and behaviors, and takes a long time to put in solutions to meet the needs of customers, but nothing like a pandemic to force your hand in a matter of months to adapt to new customer desires and needs and things of that nature. The number of things that we've seen at our bank and along with our peers as well is the struggle to combat fraud. Fraud's not new. It's been moving in this channel, in this direction for quite a while. But what we've seen is a rush of fraud move into these digital channels, and that relate to account takeovers. They relate to provision fraud, return and reversal frauds. You have all kinds of phishing going on because of the information overload. Fraudsters are keying in on those channels to take advantage of customers who at this point in time are trying to balance what's reality, what's good, what's not. Everybody in the world is communicating with customers through these electronic channels, including banks. So spoofing is a big deal, phishing is a big deal, and it's all related back to account takeover. We're also seeing a lot of sleeper activity along with our peers, where these fraudsters saw this coming early on, staged accounts, stole data, and have been actively utilizing these accounts in small ways to avoid fraud filters and profiles. Profiles are another big issue for banks like ourselves that profile behavior and use fraud tools and solutions to mitigate fraud, as behaviors and profiles change it overnight. So you now have customers who have never had a delivery service or provisioned their card into these various types of vendor services or curbside pickups or food delivery, but now they rely on that, and it exploded overnight. So profiles historically take a little while to develop. So we've had to adapt and put in some other solutions and be real creative to ensure that we're not disrupting our customers' spending patterns during a time where disruption is not even an option, as our customers need to spend the money in various ways that we hadn't really seen to this level before. And a lot of it is sourced from the massive cash injection that's flowing through our country through stimulus after stimulus. You have all the EIP payments, you have PPP. Money is flowing like it's never flown before. So generally on a retail-based customer where there's a large injection of cash flow, transaction spend is high, risk is high associated with that. Fraudsters are no different. They caught on to that fairly quickly. They've sourced a lot of data over the years from data breaches that I believe they've been sitting on for a while. And a lot of that results in brute force attacks, bin trolling attacks, account inquiry through these services such as, I'm not going to name names of merchants, but we all know who they are. And efforts to verify the PAN data and start to enact and create criminal fraud. Generally, because as we adapt our rules, these customer behaviors, travel is down, so that's out. We're trying to figure out where customers are going and how they're getting there, and they're spending money in places that they've never spent before. That throws fraud processes into disarray. Another significant component of the pandemic that we're seeing play out is an explosion in the chargeback space. We're not new to this. The networks acknowledged it, merchants acknowledged it. The timeframes for resolution have extended significantly. Collaboration and such has been very helpful, but that's delayed as well. So a lot of frustration in that space as we try our best to remedy customer dissatisfaction or customer service claims, cancellations, gym memberships. Customers don't quite know how to deal with all of that. And we sit in the middle and help mediate those frustrations between merchants and issuers. So a lot of time and effort in that channel. But I would say the organized crime has shifted significantly. We've always dealt with low-end runners. They're skimming ATMs and gas stations. Those have always been there, and those will still be there. And those, I think we've all done fairly well of identifying and preventing. Organized crime is different, sophisticated. It's the technology is superior to most, and we're chasing that all the time. And whenever there's that kind of money in the environment that we're in, that's a hot spot for these enterprises that are coming in with criminal intent to take advantage of consumers. So we're seeing everything from significant attacks to romance scams, especially as it relates to EIP. The state unemployment fraud is significant as well. That's public. Everyone knows what's going on there. A lot of stolen identities, fueling multiple payments and such. So as an overview, macro, as we were speaking of, the challenges for issuing banks are significant. The biggest thing that we've seen that has helped us be successful is understanding how to reach a customer and the difference between authentication and verification. Those are two separate processes when dealing with customers, as it means to interact with a customer electronically in ways that we hadn't before, or at least to the level we hadn't before. So as a high level, those are some of the challenges and things that we've seen in fraud space. I think everyone's frustrated in dealing with the same pace of change and trying to ensure we combat fraud, authenticate our customers who are putting cards in all types of third-party digital wallets and provisioning and services that are just new to everyone. So profiling has become a challenge as customers are changing as fast as we are, realizing who they want to partner with, who they trust on the merchant side, who they want to give their data, their money to. It's created a little bit of a disarray process for issuers as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brandon. I mean, it's amazing to see just how quickly the fraudsters were able to get organized on some of these initiatives. And I think you're right with your note about just simply they've been there. I believe there are things they've been sitting on that they're able to kind of act on once things started to change. Speaking of things changing, I just wanted to add a little bit of a question to any of you guys. You know, what should organizations be doing, as obviously things changed when the pandemic hit and then people started to adjust, and now I don't know if it's hopeful thinking, but maybe we'll start rounding a corner soon with immunizations happening and hopefully better and better numbers. Maybe people start traveling more. Do we see if there are challenges ahead for that, and what should merchants and issuers and everybody in between be thinking about as perhaps consumer behavior begins to change once again?
So I can take a stab at it and then you guys chime in. Everyone knows like fraud's not going to go away, right? We're gonna keep finding ways to mitigate the fraud, and the fraudsters are going to find another way to steal and do bad things. So I see a couple of things. One is, I don't know that consumer digital spend is going to drop, or is this kind of our foray into the new normal? The other thing that we see happening is, because of what happened last year with holiday season, that holiday season now is likely going to start earlier and earlier, which means we have to plan sooner and sooner for some of these things. And so those are some aspects that we need to think about, but I don't know that it necessarily means that we ever let our guards up, right? It's just a matter of really leaning in and figuring out how do we evolve and shift. And I think the industry has done a good job over the last few years at putting out new tools and solutions and even protocol versions that have adapted to the consumer spend. And one example, and I think we'll probably talk about this, is with 3D Secure. I mean, it was introduced in 1999, 2000. We didn't have iPhones then, right? Alexa was not born then. Like, consumers are spending different now. So the way that 3D Secure once worked, it was dated. It was kind of like this dusty old protocol on the side. And as consumer shopping spend and behavior have changed, we finally saw an embrace of something old that worked in certain markets. Like 3D Secure had its place, and it's been adopted really well in markets outside of the US due to some mandates and regulation. So we've got these proof points, but it wasn't fitting to today's consumer. And so what we've seen now is the networks really band together to say, all right, we've got to listen to our issuing banks. We have to listen to the merchant, and we have to figure out these tools that can bend and not break when consumer shopping trends have changed. And one of the things with that is, we talked a little bit about information and data, is there's so much data that's available now because of the way that we're shopping. And if we can leverage that data to make better decisions on what we do with that transaction, at the end of the day, everybody in the ecosystem should win. Because if the merchant is collecting the data and is able to share that data with the issuer, and the issuer can share that data from authentication into authorization, now we have a connected chain and there's links in the chain. Then at the end of the day, what we hope is we're catching the fraud, we're challenging where we think maybe there's higher risk based on the data that's being transmitted from the transaction. And by the way, when we challenge, we're not going to do like that old static password, give me 12 characters, uppercase, lowercase, whatever. We're going to do it with biometrics. We're going to do it with an OTP password. And then we're going to share the result of that in the authorization flow. Because one of the worst experiences would be, you asked me to authenticate myself. I did, and then I get declined. Like, I think everybody would agree, like, that's a pretty bad user experience. And I think the merchant would agree with that. I think the issuer would agree with that. And I think the cardholder would. So if we can figure out a way that there's a link between all of these pieces, then I think one of those new trends about the data and the increase in digital commerce can be embraced for not just a trend of the moment, but like really changing the way that we do things in a digital environment moving forward, and then give us the flexibility to add new use cases when the trends change again, or when fraud patterns change. And I think that's something that the industry should be really proud of over the last few years, that we've gone from like industry that at one time was very, rigid, and to now being able to like fluidly adapt within, what the market and the consumers are telling us. And then obviously like chasing down that fraud and making sure that we have the ability to notice those fraud patterns like Jeff and Brandon have mentioned, and kind of get ahead of them as much as we can. And I think that, again, we'll see an increase in overall payment acceptance across the board.
Yeah, excellent, Jamie. I think those are great comments just about how we see technology changing over time. Specific to 3DS, I think, the US has a long ways to go, it seems, in its adoption. I think you made a lot of great points about just the availability of that data, and some excellent call outs there about making sure we really leverage that. And also, I think, when we think about regulation and 3DS, or the need for strong consumer authentication in other markets outside of the US, I think we kind of, at least some people I've talked to, we get the idea that that's not for the US. So that's a solution for overseas or somewhere else. Do you think you can speak to why maybe that's not the best way of thinking about a solution like 3DS?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also ask us to think about 3DS as the rails to do a lot of great things. It's not just about challenging a cardholder and making them authenticate themselves. That might have been why it was conceptualized 20 years ago, but I would just challenge us to maybe think about it a little bit differently, and the flexibility that those rails give us to do other things. So the first part is there's a lot of US retailers that are multinational. A lot of those multinational retailers are doing 3D Secure in other markets, whether it's a regulated PSD2 market, India two-factor authentication. There's a lot of mandates in the AP markets as well. And while that might be the reason why they're adopting, when we start looking at the data, we're seeing trends that you would think everybody would want, such as reduction in fraud and increase in approvals. And if we can figure out the way that that's adopted in the US market, which is not regulated, then we're going to see benefits across the board. Now, that doesn't mean run 3D Secure on 100% of your volume, because I think we all know that there's a time and there's portfolios and there's transaction sets that probably make sense for that. We've also seen the networks introduce new use cases to leverage those 3D Secure rails. It started in the protocol, and now we're seeing the networks build programs around that, and that's the concept of data only. So data only is essentially leveraging the data that's available through the 3D Secure protocols and sending it into an authorization system without a challenge. There's not going to be friction in that flow. So I think solutions like that make a lot of sense in the US market. They provide an easier entry to market because there's not as much integration, because you're not dealing with any potential challenge or browser type screens. And it's all done on the back end. And so we see some clients, they'll integrate 3D Secure for certain segments of their business, and they'll leverage the data only flows for other segments of their business to really rise up the portfolio across the board. So I think it's just a matter of like really understanding the needs of your business, and then really understanding some of the tools that are out there and how they can be modified to help achieve those goals. Because I think when we really look at it, 3D Secure has really changed a lot over the past, 4 or 5 years since 2.0 was introduced, and even more so since the new protocol versions of 2.2 have come out that offer non-payment use cases. So I think Brandon or Jeff, one of them mentioned like card adds to wallets. Now there's mechanisms to help authenticate those card adds to the wallets as well. So we'll continue to see that. The other trend that we all touched upon was like, we're not just shopping on our laptops or our PCs anymore. We're using mobile phones and native applications. And in the old version of 3D Secure, sure, you could try to like fit a square peg into a round hole or whatever the saying is and leverage the 1.0 protocol in native app. It wasn't great. 2.0 and EMB 3DS gives us the ability to really streamline how 3D Secure and authentication is enabled in those native apps. And it gives a lot more choice and control to both the issuers and the merchant to make sure that the merchant shopper and the issuer's cardholder can get in, complete their purchase, and have a streamlined experience going up. So I think it's just a matter of like, if we haven't looked at 3D Secure in a while, it's probably a good time to take another look at it.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jamie. I know we're starting to run a little bit short on time. This is just such a great discussion. I just want to remind everybody that Q&A is available at the end of the session. We're going to still try to make time for that, but I have at least 2 more topics that I really want to get through real quick. The first one for you, Jeff. I mean, we're living in an interesting age. I know omnichannel is a term that's been around for a long time. It's not new, but we're actually living it in this touchless world, right? Where you have orders being initiated digitally, remotely, whatever word you want to place there. And then you have consumers showing up to pick up the physical goods, right? The buy online, pick up in store. And so I'm just curious, if you have any observations on how fraudsters are trying to take advantage of kind of the learning curve that's just kind of naturally in place for bringing kind of the digital remote together with the physical world.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll share 2 examples. Maybe I'll work backwards on sort of the buy online, pick up in store. Maybe I'll start with a trend that we're seeing a lot of traction in, a fraud trend, and it's around returns or refunds abuse. I'll put it in that way. It may just be on how you want to define it, whether it's a return or a refund. We see a lot of instances today of fraudsters returning back a box of rocks or a bag of sand, and in many cases, the refund is issued before the goods are actually received back in the fulfillment center, and so there's sort of this like disconnect, if you will, where I get made whole and the goods never make it back. In this case, or what does make it back, it's an empty box or something. We see this notion of I buy something and I return back a broken one and I keep the good one. So there's a lot of instances in here, maybe broadly like merchandise not received or items not received. And then this notion of being, I don't have to go any sort of physical place to do this, right? I can do it all from the comfort of my home. We're seeing this problem really exacerbate itself, and it's a tough one. How do I genuinely discern that someone's trying to do something malicious in returning something? Technology are some areas that we're seeing that may be useful in here, and I always sort of preface this and say it's a layered solution. I'd love to say like, oh, we have this, like I'm going to hold it till the end of our panel here today and tell you the magic solution. Sadly, it doesn't exist, but this notion of having layers, I think, is really effective. A technology like behavioral biometrics, sometimes it's called user behavior analytics, but it's actually looking at intent. It can help discern how somebody's typing something or entered something in, or how long they spent on a page, or a number of different sort of characteristics that may help you discern what's happening, or perhaps bring more context to metadata that's on there. It's one thing for me to type in my email. You may get a little concerned if I cut and paste my email in. You may feel much better if it got auto-filled in what I was doing. Chances are then it's my machine, right? It knows me. Um, anyway, some sort of like very subtle things. If I backspaced or if I couldn't get my email right like 5 times, like after a while you might begin to like it gets some intent. And anyway, you get a lot of these signals, and it can lead to just some better decision making. But refunds and return abuse, it's definitely one we're seeing that has kind of grown here during the pandemic. I kind of touched early on this like buy online, pick up at curbside, and Jamie's right. It's this is as much like a fraud problem as like a customer experience. What I can't have is like 100 cars lined up in the parking lot because I'm interrogating like every customer to the ends to try to figure out if they're like a bad actor. It can't work that way. And so it's some retraining of staff as far as like what to look for. But there's also an experience involved in this, and I want people to come back and enjoy the services, goods that are provided. I think there's some technology in here that can help, again, discern some of this intent at the time the order is placed versus trying to like figure this all out when someone drives up and is wearing a mask. That's really tough. So I'll come back to sort of some layers in here as to where we think this can be effective and maybe some measures which you can combat.
Excellent. That's great insight, Jeff. And I know a lot of merchants have worked very hard to find that perfect balance between trying to make sure they have the right person getting the right things, but not slowing things up and providing that safe, convenient experience. One more topic, just shifting again one more time for you, Brandon. I know a lot of folks, they're looking at account takeover. It's been on the rise. It's a big deal. And, I would just love to get, your insights as to what you've been seeing, how it's been affecting your customers, and kind of what you've been able to do about it.
Sure. Yeah, account takeover, it's not anything new that we haven't seen before or other issuers in the industry. We've just seen an explosion in that channel fraud. And again, that's specific around, there's a lot of information being shared. Customers are sharing their information more than they ever have, especially in the CNP space where they're having to create accounts and share emails and address information, cell phone numbers so that we can authenticate with the merchant can. So this explosion of profile development across the internet as customers look for new channels to spend money and make purchases is creating the perfect storm for these organized fraudsters to come in and extract that data through some form and then turn it around and create it for phishing attacks against customers that are identifying as the bank, as fraud services and solutions, or as the government. So there's a lot of that going on. There's so much misinformation being spread about EIP and how the government's spending or sending money out, or how banks are communicating with customers, because there's been a lot of decline in that shift in payment activity. We had to adapt really quick. So we had to make some very hard decisions. Do we want more friction to protect the asset, or do we want our customers to have a little bit more flexibility in how they're going to spend their money? So that is a very tough balance. And it's very difficult unless you have the ability to create a digital profile of your customer to understand who's on the other side of that payment. And there's a balance of authentication there or friction on the verification. If you don't want to drive customers to a point of frustration where they want to go another way or use another card. So it's a challenge that we all face, and it's getting worse. And it's a commingled environment. As things open back up, fraudsters will take advantage of that. You'll see that shift move back and forth between CNP and physical. That'll be a challenge as we try to identify that our customer provisioned that card, and are they standing at that terminal trying to make the purchase? And which do we trust? And at what point do we start getting customers comfortable with authentication and verification at a very high level as behaviors start to shift back? So account takeover, not new. It's a challenge. I think some of the other components of that we struggle with is identifying what's first party and what's third party criminal fraud. That's been an issue in the industry for a long time. It's finally started getting some visibility over the last few years. And it's really a problem for issuers and merchants alike. as we have customers over the last 6 to 12 months who have had a lot of dissatisfaction or discomfort in their CNP purchases. They're buying things that they thought they were getting X, and when it got delivered, it wasn't what they thought it was, or it was a cheap knockoff. So immediate dissatisfaction represents itself in higher disputes, at which point, there's a lot of frustration and a lot of expense and cost in trying to mediate that on behalf of customers. So there's an awkward balance coming for issuers as our customers start to re-engage in the physical spend, but also they've adapted, and the norm of CNP is here to stay. I truly believe that. As customers got used to a lot of that comfort, in-house spending and delivery services, and it's easy. And I think we've all done a really good job relaxing some of those rules and capabilities to allow our customers to live the way they want to live. And even post-pandemic, there will be those that want to, freely go, and those that stay in the space that they are. And with, more stimulus money coming and more cash injected into the economy, I think we've got a long ways to go here. So quick advice I could give to issuing friends is do your best to identify a digital profile of your customers, know where they are and what devices they're utilizing. If you've authenticated them once, maybe don't verify and do a verification on the back end to relieve some of that discomfort and friction in that space. And regarding account takeovers, just watch the digital provisions, watch where cards are being inquired regarding different wallets and services, things of that nature. That'll give you some quick insight. There's no way you should see a digital provision after a large cash injection followed by a travel notice. There's not many people traveling right now. There are ways to scam those fraud restrictions. So there's a good healthy balance there. So for the issuers, that's a big component. You have to put in strategies to identify how these guys are doing account takeover, and it's bigger than we think. So those are some parting things that I would send out as we all face the same challenges. And like I said, I fear this is going to be around for a while.
Excellent, Brandon. That's some great insight. I appreciate you sharing all of that. We are down to the last few minutes. Leslie, do we have any questions in the Q&A?
We sure do, Alan. First, I would like to thank participants for the question. The first question is, I think we should pose it to Jamie, if you're still available. It is from Alexis. Alexis, thank you for your question. The question is, Jamie, how is 3DS reacting to the blurred lines between what's card present versus card not present? And maybe, Jeff, after Jamie chimes in, you'd be probably want to chime in with your perspective on that as well.
Sure. So first of all, I'm still laughing at Jeff's comment about the 100-car line at the store because all I think about is kindergarten pickup for my son. But I'll put that image out of my head and get back to Alexis's question. I think with 3D Secure, it comes with the device origination. So like if I'm shopping from my phone, it's a card not present transaction. And that's really where 3D Secure is meant to help prevent and mitigate fraud. We definitely are starting to see some use cases with the buy online, pick up in store. But again, the transaction happened in the digital environment. And I think that's where Brandon and Jeff talks a lot about, like, you're authenticating during the purchase flow and then you're verifying at the pickup. And so we're really focused on making sure that we're letting the right people complete the transaction and making sure that the data is being exchanged to provide the intelligence on giving the issuer the ability to say, yes, this is good. I'm going to let it proceed without a step up, or, hey, you know what? I think it might be Brandon, but he's coming from a different device. Let me just have him go through an OTP or use some of the behavioral biometrics like Jeff mentioned. So that's really where 3D Secure is focused on, the transaction completion. And on the other aspect is really where the verification piece is happening.
Thank you, Jamie. Jeff, do you want to, or sorry, Brandon, or whoever would like to chime in? No? Okay, I have another question.
Jamie did a good job. I don't know that I have much more to add.
All right, no worries. I do have a next question. The next question is from Carrie. Carrie, thank you so much. It is, can we talk about how we would balance consumer or browser privacy concerns and or restrictions with the desire to use more data to make better decisions to prevent fraud?
Good
I see you nodding your head there,
happy to-
Jamie. I see you nodding your head. Who would like
I
to
mean,
go first?
this is like a global topic, and I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer, but like I can give you some of the key pieces that we always work with our partners on. It intent of that data and how it's being used, and then the ability to get rid of and delete that data should the cardholder or the consumer request it to be deleted. And I think those two are really important. So for example, we're not using device data to go sell to a third party to be able to do marketing. We're using device data to make a better decision from a transaction risk assessment perspective. And I think those two pieces are really important. And then obviously the ability to delete the data is also equally important. We've got GDPR in Europe. We have data localization requirements in countries like India, for example, which is always fun. So those are two really fundamental areas that we look at. But again, it's a road that can be navigated pretty finely, and happy to engage in discussions offline if we want to get into any more detail on that. But I don't know if the other panelists have perspective to share.
I think that's fair. A lot of it is balanced with what our customers are comfortable sharing. And for an issuer, we don't know what all data is being shared outside of what we have in house. So as customers share that information with merchants and retailers, we don't know what's out there. So a lot of that is, yeah, we're not looking for SKU level data so we can resell it or do deep dives on marketing to point customers one way or the other. We're looking for specific information that's being shared as account setups or device information for purchases that allow us to make a better decision. Because the last thing anyone wants is more friction in the transaction authorization side. And that data allows us to build profiles to help us understand that, oh, by the way, my customer did establish an account at that merchant. Therefore, I trust that there's a confidence indicator in that I can utilize to help, release and lack some of those rules in the future. So from an issuer perspective, I would say to our merchant friends, yeah, the data that can be shared that's relevant is certainly important regarding account setup, perhaps even purchase history, device information, et cetera. I don't need SKU, I don't need the size of the jeans that the customer bought, but that type of information that can be shared through the stream would help me on the back end prevent a lot of false positives in the CNP space.
Thank you for that, Brendan, and thank you, Jamie. I have one last question in the interest of time, and I would like to thank Edward Perez for this question. The question is as follows. Is there value in identifying key legacy and potential fraud patterns, how best to address them, and suggest test cases that can be positioned for certification or UAT testing adaptable across the payment ecosystem? And depending on your answers, this may roll into a potential work item for the USPF forum. Brandon, I see your eyes going left and right. I'm not sure if you want to go first, or you, Jeff, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I can start, sure. I would say definitely worthwhile exploration of the idea to help understand what common fraud schemes are out there and perhaps best practices for an issuer or a merchant to attack those type of schemes. Unfortunately, over the last year, a lot of that has changed, and there's been a lot of new trends, and some of that is with a good, healthy balance of each issuer has their own strategy. They have their own risk appetite and their tolerance levels and how they interact with their customer base. Are they well financially established customers, or are they a new customer that has low cash flow and high turnover? So there's a balance there as it relates to who sees what and to what degree of confidence they have and how they deal with their customers and false positive things of that nature. But I do think there's value in exposing some of the common fraud trends that we all see, and perhaps come up with some best practices around ways we can mitigate that fraud and loss.
Thank you for that. Jeff, is there something maybe you'd want to add?
Maybe I'll give an example. Hopefully I interpreted the question right. I think it was around like legacy, or maybe how can you adapt or change. One area we see is around account opening. So as an example, maybe you're opening a bank account or applying for a credit card, or maybe just signing up for an account to have food delivered to your home, whatever it may be. What we generally see is fraudsters know the process. They are very intimately familiar with how to open an account on your particular site. What they're not familiar with is the data. They probably have it on some spreadsheet on a different monitor, and they're cut and pasting it across to like open accounts. What we generally find is consumers, they know their data. Like, I know my first name and I know my address. I don't have to like stop to do these things. What I don't know is your process to open an account. I'm not sure like what the next screen is or what you're going to ask me. What I'm getting at here is we found by like random A/B testing, showing like different ways to open up an account. Maybe I move the fields around, I change sort of the lineup. It can be very detrimental for fraudsters because they're intimately familiar with the process. For consumers, the rest of us, like, I have no idea you changed your form today, or you did. I probably only do this activity once. So it's a nice way that you can sort of use to sort of measure some intent or measure some change. One way you can kind of take the legacy and sort of move things around or do some interesting A/B testing on the process versus the data.
No, that's good. I'm going to jump in here, guys, as our time is up.
Yeah.
But I think I can speak for the broader group. Thought you guys did an excellent job covering this topic. I think to Jamie's point is it's obviously one that will continue to evolve over time. So we'll always make room for this discussion as we move forward. Ed, as I did take note of your question, right? So if there's opportunities as we move forward with the forum to address best practices, right, or add additional content, more than willing to do that, right? So thank you guys again. Great job. We are due for a break right now, so we're going to take the next 10 minutes and take a break, and then we'll come back for our last section, which is going to be focused on the Petro environment and the AFD environment and where they stand in their efforts, right? So thank you guys again. Talk to you guys soon here in about 10 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.